Hey, all right, buddy. It took me ages to get to where I am now with Genesis, so I'll just try and kind of give you a brief roadmap, or at least tell you where I kind of went. I'll try and get through this. I've got a glass of water. I'm going to try and get through it in one take, and get yourself a coffee. um, so the Book of Genesis. What even is it? The first thing when we look at a piece of text is it's important to know what it is we're looking at. Who wrote it? Who it was written to? What was the occasion? And we also want to know the type of literature. Is it fiction, like a play, like Song of Solomon is a play? Or is it poetry? Or is it factual, like a historical record? Maybe Chronicles or Kings in the Bible, or a personal eyewitness account like John's Gospel. Knowing those things will help us understand the text correctly. The type of literature, who is writing, what the occasion is, it makes a massive difference. So, most people who think about Genesis have a very interesting belief about it. They believe that Genesis and the rest of the Bible, most likely, is written directly to them in the UK 2021. And it's all the style, the literary style, it's all literally, factually true. And there were two groups, I guess, who are very invested in that particular take, and they clash on the internet, on YouTube and internet forums. You've got the atheists who are particularly interested in the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and they read Genesis as a literal scientific account written to them so that they can understand where the universe came from. But they don't believe, but still they read it that way. Yeah. Then you've got another group of Christians who are also pretty much all about the first 11 chapters, and they also read Genesis as a literally true scientific account written to them so that they can understand how the universe came into being. And these two groups clash all the time. I guess you have to agree before you can disagree, right? And that's true, and it's true here. So I wonder if these two groups are aware, if they're conscious of their common ground, the fact they read the text using exactly the same assumptions, the same hermeneutic, I think is the technical word. Quite interesting that atheists are reading a book as if it was written by God to them in the UK 2021. I don't know if they question their mental process, because where did they get that from? I think they're taking the framing for the whole discussion from the Christians, right? And they seem to be doing it unquestioningly. And and those guys will tell you how smart they are and how dumb the other group is, when they're really, both groups are making exactly the same mistake. So both groups are wrong. It's not a science book. It doesn't even attempt to be that. That's not why it was written. So, if it's not a brief history of time by a caveman, what is it? What is Genesis? The first thing to ask is, who wrote the text? How did the book itself come into existence? So, was it that Adam wrote a bit while he was alive? That whole garden thing that happened, and then he passed the book on to his son, who added a bit. Then you've got, like, I don't know, 20 generations where no one adds anything, and eventually it's passed to Noah, who writes a few chapters, and then he hands it on to his sons. They don't add much. Then we get to Abraham, who adds a whole bunch of chapters. Yeah, you get what I'm saying. I mean, that's not what happened. That is not how Genesis was put together. Genesis was written by Moses and all immediate contemporaries, as was Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, what English people call the Pentateuch. It's one whole unit, and it's always been understood that way. So even in Jesus' time, in the Gospels, when they say, "Have you read Moses?" this is what they mean. The first 5 books of the Bible. That's what they're talking about. And was Moses just an avid historian? Is that why he's writing? No. Something is happening. Big events are occurring. This is what we call the occasion of the text. Moses was instrumental in founding a nation. We have a group of people who were slaves. They leave their captivity. God brings them out of the captivity of the Egyptians and makes a covenant with them. And part of that covenant is a land promise, which is the focus of the last book, Deuteronomy. So Deuteronomy is the prep talk for taking the land, basically, because you can't be a nation without land, right? So you have a people group made a nation through covenant with God. Yeah. What we're looking at is the founding documents of a nation. That's what these 5 books are. So just to go into a bit of detail. Genesis covers like 2,000 years. Exodus tells the story about how they became slaves and how God brought them out and made a covenant with them. And that's maybe 200 years. Then you've got Leviticus, Leviticus. That's the instruction manual for the priests, basically, to keep the covenant operational. It's got all the sacrifices and such. And that the events cover probably a year. Then you've got Numbers, which is the preparation for taking the land the first time. Yeah, and the failure and the resulting 40 years in the desert. And finally, you've got Deuteronomy, which is the second preparation for taking the land after the 40 years in the wilderness. It's got warnings and promises by Moses, and it covers a single day, the last day of Moses' life. Okay, so that's the whole package. Yeah. So what is Genesis in this context? And for quite a long time, you just, before I go on, you just think about this now. What do you think it is? What's Genesis doing there? What part does it play in that? Why is it there? So for quite a long time, I thought it was the prehistory of the people group. Yeah, so in Genesis, you've got a creation story, similar to ones in other cultures. The bloodline starts with Abraham. He's the first known ancestor, if you like. The 12 tribes appear from Jacob. So you have Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, who is then later called Israel. The nation is called Israel after that. The sons aren't exactly 12, actually. But yeah, if you read it, that it's not quite 12. But hey, then you have the Joseph story, and that places them in Egypt, ready for them to be liberated. Right, where this is when the liberation story starts. So you think, yeah, okay, it's the backstory of the people group, and that's wrong. It's as wrong as thinking it's a science book. It's completely wrong. But at least it's a mature view. Yeah, we're not treating the text like children. But nevertheless, it is wrong, and it took me ages to understand what Genesis is. The first clue. It probably shouldn't have taken me ages, but the first clue is that it's not a history of the people group. Okay, as a history of the people group, it totally sucks. You've got a creation story, a fall story, then a ton of people which have nothing recorded about them except their name and age at their death. No apology. It just rolls on. Then you have the Noah flood story, some other bits. A giant skip forward to Abraham, after that point, I guess it could be considered a reasonable history. So it kind of, it doesn't really exactly look like a history. Or at least it's a very, very selective history. Yeah. And the second clue that it's not a history of the people group, is because other Bible writers don't treat it like that. So if it was just the backstory, what happened before Moses turned up, it wouldn't be considered all that important. The other 4 books would be more important. But it's exactly the opposite. Genesis is treated as much more important than the other 4. The themes in Genesis turn up all through the Bible. It's treated as a kind of fundamental blueprint. If I can say it like that. The themes and the patterns from Genesis reoccur consistently throughout the entire canon of Scripture. Yeah. There are many examples I could give, but let me just give one from the New Testament, which should just be a slam dunk. Yeah. So the New Testament mentions many of the Old Testament characters. You've got David, Jonah, Job, Ezekiel, Elijah. But by an absolute mile, 2 characters are mentioned more than any others, and those 2 are Moses and Abraham. Now, it shouldn't be surprising that the guy who wrote the first 5 books of the Bible and founded this nation, Israel, it's not surprising that he should be mentioned a lot. But that he gets approximately similar airplay to someone who only has 14 chapters in Genesis. That's kind of amazing. So it's not a great history book, and Old Testament writers and New Testament writers consider it fundamental, not just with reference to the events of Moses' life, but the founding of the nation, but fundamental to the whole Bible going forward. So, what even is Genesis? This is the conclusion I've come to. The nation was founded on a covenant. Genesis isn't the backstory of the people that entered into the covenant. It's about the other party in the covenant. Genesis is really about Yahweh. It's about who they're making the covenant with. Yeah? To read Genesis from a different, slightly different angle to what I just described before. God creates the world. God makes humans. Humans have a broken relationship with God. God destroys the world in the flood because of sin. God makes a covenant with a man called Abraham. And this is what it looked like for God to make a covenant with a man called Abraham. Yeah, it's not about Adam, Noah, and Abraham exactly. It's more about how God relates to them and how God relates to the world. And because it's about God, it has an enduring reality beyond the immediate context. The other four books are specifically about those people, those events, that covenant. But Genesis is really more about who God is. Yeah, so it has a much wider scope. Yeah, an eternal scope. Moses writes Genesis as a description of Yahweh. It's an introduction to the God Israel is making a covenant with. That's what it is. Yeah. That's it, buddy. That's it. It took me a long time. Yeah, that is my belief. All right, have a good one.